Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium's second in a series of webinars on building a resilient enterprise, mastering supply chain maturity and risk management, moving from stage 1 to stage 2, aligned to Gartner's model. We appreciate you taking the time today. We know you're all busy, and we're of course focused on how to build that resilient enterprise. And hopefully we'll be providing you some new insights into making decisions at the executive and tactical levels. Most importantly, hope everyone's family is healthy and safe. With that, just a brief overview of this webinar series. On November 14th, we talked about the Gartner's model and the 5-stage model, gave an overview, and we talked about the stage 3 and identifying that stage 3 wall. Today, we're going to back up and we're going to go through the stages much more in detail. And we're going to focus on moving from stage 1 to stage 2, the ad hoc to the optimistic silo environments. Our next webinar, we'll just march our way smartly down through the stages. The next webinar will focus moving from stage 2 to stage 3, which is centralized and repeatable operations. And then we'll get into moving to stage 4, data decision-making, and stage 5, the optimized ecosystem. Finally, we'll wrap it up looking at more best practices and roadmaps on how do you get to stage 5, what does it take? So we look forward to you joining us throughout this webinar series. With that, again, my name is Jim DeVries. I'll be the host of today's webinar. And with us, we have Greg Schlegel from Lewis, Delaware. He's the CEO and founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, and for over 40 years of experience. And he has a book called Supply Chain Risk Management, an Emerging Discipline. It was emerging back in 2015. It looks like you accomplished what you were looking for in your book there, Greg. It's no longer emerging. So Greg, a few words of introduction.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. Pleasure to be here with you today to basically chat about our passion, which is supply chain risk and resiliency. As Jim mentioned, I'm the founder of Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. We've been in business for almost 15 years now, and we'll talk a little bit more, give you a thumbnail sketch of who we are and what we do in a minute. So back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And just to let you know, I'm in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And my core beliefs are that success starts with discovering the untapped potential of the employees, and in fact, everyone. That's where my passion is, from the leadership down to the shop floor, and we might even want to include the suppliers and customers in that, right? So we live in an ecosystem. It is in developing others that we excel in building a resilient enterprise. With that, we'll get into the deliverables of today's webinar. First, we'll get into the insights of how to build a resilient enterprise, again, from stage 1 perspective, and focus on that. Then we'll get into overcoming the barriers to increase operational stability, and then the roadmap to stability. And then we'll get into success stories. We have some case studies that Greg will go through. And then at the end of the day, it's all about the financials, right? We have to be able to link it to the bottom line. With that, Greg, an overview on the consortium.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. This is a real quick one on who we are and what we do, just to get you grounded. We are, at the moment, 33 companies. That's about 1,700 risk professionals around the globe. We operate in 23 countries, and we've been in business for just about 15 years. On the right-hand side, we have 3 pillars. We started with education. We'll talk about that when we introduce one of our tools. We still do a lot of education around the globe. with our partners and from our book and so forth. The middle pillar is consulting. We lead, guide, direct, and coach companies on their supply chain risk and resiliency journey. And then on the right-hand side, we have a host of software as a service, cloud-based tools that focus on supply chain risk and resilience. They support our vision from our book, and they focus again on supply chain risk and resiliency, and they provide scale. On the left-hand side, we think about 5 areas that we provide from a tool and a service arena. We have 2 online certificate courses. They're self-paced online using an LMS, learning management system. They're self-paced, as I mentioned. One is basic supply chain risk and resiliency for manufacturers, and the other is dedicated to services and especially public healthcare logisticians. We do coaching and consulting. We have the SC R&R platform solutions when you want to improve your visibility and scale your supply chain risk journey. And then we'll talk about today 2 online assessments. We have a supply chain management online readiness assessment tool that evaluates your supply chain process maturity and your inherent risk. We'll talk about that. And we'll touch base on a new online assessment we have, which is pure risk. It is really pure risk. We call it the 90-day action plan. It evaluates through questions of discovery your risk maturity on our maturity model. Where are you? It profiles who you are from a risk appetite point of view, and it also identifies your risk culture and your operating culture, and then provides you action plans using AI ML algorithms, action plans that are based on where you are, who you are, and how you operate to move the lever forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And just a brief overview about Enhance International Group. We're a group of about 70 partners. We have consultants, consulting companies, and software as a solution service, really feeding the people process data part of the overall driving for excellence and execution for companies. We lead through thought leadership, why democratizing the technology that our partners provide. EIG serves as that master integrator to provide access to these brightest companies that are out there in the marketplace. Our team is delivering as a dedicated to empowering the organization's workforce by leveraging our expertise covering the people process data technology that I discussed, and helping enable your ecosystem, which is very aligned to our webinar today, which is how do we increase the maturity of your supply chain, and how does that drive growth and profitability into your ecosystem. So below there, you can kind of see some of the things that we focus on, but what we focus on is providing practical solutions that are proven out in the marketplace. We're very good at executing and driving improvement to make your company more stable to deal with, especially this VUCA world that we're living in. With that, I will we'll get right into the webinar and the agenda today. And the agenda starts off with understanding the Gartner 5-stage maturity models and building a foundation for success, each of those stages. And then we'll get into the 3 dimensions of stable growth. Greg will define that, and moving from stage 1 to 2. And then we'll get into our supply chain management readiness assessment, and tiers 2 and 3. We'll align that to the maturity model of Gartner. And then we'll come up with some real world case studies. Greg will cover that, and then we'll of course bring it all back to the money, right? Always comes back to the money. With that, I'll get into understanding Gartner's 5-stage maturity model. So many of you may be familiar with this. This was, I think, almost back in the 90s. It's pretty old, but it works. So if it ain't broke, you don't need to fix it, right? So on the y-axis, you have Gartner's adapted uh, perspective of the mindset of the company. So your uh, what is the mindset of your company? Are you looking at inside out perspective, or you look outside in and making your decisions? And then on the x-axis, you have, are you targeting cost or service? So in other words, service meaning the customer. Do you care about the customer? And cost is more internally generally focused. And that's why under cost, you only see it, it's kind of in that transition stage between inside out and outside in. But let's walk the model a bit and see what we're talking about. So stage one, I call this the amoeba state. You're just building your company, and it's kind of like you're focused on revenue at all cost. You're starting to build product lines. You have your business units working, trying to form business units, but you're might not quite be there. You might have some product. You're forming product lines, maybe, and you're moving from one or two products to a company that has a compilation of products, and you'll see that they align to different goals, and therefore they start aligning under different business units, which gets you into stage two. So the outcome of a stage one company is your revenue focus, because you're just trying to get revenue into the door so you can pay folks. You may be not making much money at this point in time, but you're trying to, you're not scalable at this time. You're trying to be adaptable, but it's expensive to make each one of your widgets or each one of your service offerings. You're not having high, the margins that you would like to see, because you don't have sufficient volume going through your company. So you want to quickly get out of stage one, obviously, and get to stage two, where you have your business units forming along your product lines. And this is good, except then you start building these pillars of power. And then the business units, where what you did from stage one to stage two is to separate your business units. Now the business units are competing against each other for the same customers. Your customers are confused. Everybody's confused. And you kind of run out of gas to a certain extent. You're starting to be more cost focused. So here you're looking at cost per unit. You look at cost. You have one group of people purely looking at cost, and you have another part of the organization purely looking at revenue. You kind of understand your margin, but you really don't understand your cost stack, because there's all that between folks that are spending money and justifying. So you're reorganizing a lot in this stage. You're trying to figure out how the business units should be aligned, and you're focused on building the business units. So that stage is, the outcome is, we got to come up with standardized process. You're locally scalable at the business unit level, but you're really, again, you're still not adaptable to the marketplace. So then you get to stage three and you say, okay, we need to start working together. Maybe we're going to centralize our procurement, centralize HR, trying to centralize different parts of the organization. And it's a very important stage here. And it's very hard to move from stage two to stage three. And between each one of these stages, it may be 2 to 5 years for companies to move from stage 1 to 2 and so forth. At best, you can do it in a year and a half if you really know what you're getting yourself into. So at stage three, the outcome is you're trying to get to that point where you actually understand margin per SKU. You've done your SKU rationalization. You've cleaned it up. You've rationalized your business units. You're reorganizing, not from an internal perspective, but you're aligning yourself to the marketplace, the customer. You actually realize that the customer can add value to your products. So in this stage, from going from stage three to stage four, you're actually seeing customer value. And this is the hardest leap for companies to make. And very few companies make it to stage 4. Only about 5 to 10% of companies make it there, where they've actually created that ecosystem of, you see customer value, demand, supply, product, and you're building that ecosystem, and you're able to share across your business units what needs to be shared and what should not be shared. You clearly understand that. So if your business units, one's making an engineered order and one's making something that is a commodity, and you're trying to combine those business units centralization, you often get into trouble because they have different needs. So at stage 4, you've rationalized all those issues and you're not having those issues anymore. And you're focused on the customer, and you realize that if you can move faster than your competitor for new products and deliver better to what the customer really wants, you're actually asking them now, and you're moving there, you're actually gaining market share, and your costs are going down and your margins are going up. And you're like, wow, this it does work. And then you get to, once you've matured there and you know how to tweak the customer, you're actually focused an ecosystem on margin to serve. Now you're scalable, value-centric outcomes. So the exemplars, as we often call them, are doing all of this. And they're moving at a different path. They're very adaptable. You know, from a supply chain risk perspective, someone asked in one of the questions, well, what's the risk? Well, here in stage 5, your risk, you look at risk as an opportunity. You're going to go like, oh, there's a risk event. I'm going to gobble up more market share when I'm at stage 5. At stage 1, you're saying, I don't know if I'm going to survive. I gotta weather this risk event. Stage 2, you're still there at that survival. In stage 3, you're starting to realize that, you know, you are, from the risk perspective and risk events, you're getting to the point where you're starting to incorporate those in from a local level and from an outside in level. And on stage 4, again, you're starting to look at risk as an opportunity. So I wanted to make sure I answered that question from one of the folks that asked that question at the in the early on stages. So when we go into detail for each stage, and please do ask questions at any time. Stage 1, again, is ad hoc. I call it the amoeba state. You know, you're matching typical characteristics of unstructured. You're reactive to process. You don't really have gunners. You have a lot of good intentions. You have a lot of energy. We're going to grow. We're going to build this company. You know, you may look like these guys here in the picture. You know, the process and capabilities are unstructured. They're in somebody's head. There's a lack of standardization. Success depends on individual efforts. You live by SMEs and you live and die by firefighters. And this is where the firefighters become the leaders. And you don't know if the person who's creating the fire is the person that's fixing the fire. And everything's a little bit chaotic in this stage. So the remediation is, you know, you don't have those structured processes. So you don't know what the data is. You can't, you know, you're running by gut feel. You're not running by data. And the focus is building foundational processes. What are your core processes that you run your company? So in this stage, it's kind of fun and in some ways, you know, a startup phase, but you know, you're just trying to get revenue in the door. You're going to have on and off months and quarters. It's in the question every day is this business scalable? That's if you hear yourself saying, we don't know if this is scalable, you're in stage 1, you know, and it seems like everything's expensive. If that's the type of dialogue you're having within the organization, that's where you're at. From a stage 2 perspective, again, this is where you're in the silos and you're building structure. You didn't have any structure before, and now you're having structure and you're having silos. Now, a lot of people talk about silos as being bad, but it isn't necessarily. a necessary step to go through in building a company. It's not something you can avoid. You can't go from amoeba stage to stage 3 in Gartner. You do have to rationalize your product lines, your product offerings,
Mhm.
and making sure that they make sense. So your core processes, you do have early wins along the silos, and you're aligning your folks to their capabilities. You're starting to understand the difference between make to order, make to stock, engineer to order, hopefully, and you're aligning the products accordingly. But there's still a lot of inefficiencies because you're carrying products that you need to rationalize your product line, because some of those products may not be what you want to be, and you may need to split off that business, sell it, that particular silo effort, and you may need to move to something different. And you have to and you keep on asking yourself, who am I as a company? So a lot of folks in stage 2, it's, as it says up at the top, it's opportunistic. You're trying to figure out who you are, and you're figuring out that standardized works to a certain extent, but one size does not fit all. And you're locally scalable. So if you have a manufacturing facility that makes widgets and it's a make to stock, and you try to mix it with another facility that's making things that is engineered to order, and you mix those, you're finding that you're losing customers, you're creating inefficiencies, you're having problems in your new product development as it transitions into new products. You're hitting the wall. So you're saying, well, we first of all, we have to rationalize everything we're working on, and we want to move to stage 3 for a repeatable process. Well, that's what it's the give to take, give to get. So what am I going to give up in order to get something? So this is the consolidation where you have to have the hard questions of building those repeatable processes along your divisions, and saying which divisions really should be working together, which ones shouldn't. How do I build a centralized group, finance, accounting, HR, all these centralized functions to support my 4 or 5 divisions. And this is a tough stage to be in. And you're looking to, again, standardize. You have your value stream, all your core processes, and you're focusing on best practices sharing across divisions where it makes sense. Of course, the remediation here is, overcoming some of these barriers and challenges of scaling those centralized processes, as I mentioned. And you're going to have a lot of resistance to change because everybody's built their divisions in the silos, and now you're asking them to dismantle them for the greater good of the company. So this is where change management really plays a major role. Not that in the other stages, moving from 1 to 2 doesn't play a major role, but this, you really have to get into, you're going to have to change. So when people say, I want to improve, but I don't want to change, this is where they get stuck, because you got to change the way that you work. From a financial perspective, as we look at it, we have those end-to-end standards and interoperability. We're trying to work together across our organization. And we're trying to say, what is, from an enterprise perspective, instead of a silo division perspective, how do we scale? But you're not getting the growth that you think you should be getting. And then you realize that you forgot somebody, the customer. And that's what stage 4 is all about. The realization that there's an actual customer out there, and we need data to get to the customer, and we need validation. So this is about change management, customer, and data all coming together to provide you those insights to drive your business. So here you do have all your systems working well. You're able to create accountability, and you're not running on gut feel anymore. The firefighter mentality is hopefully gone or minimized, and you're not run by firefighters, but you're run by stage 4. You're actually run by data that makes sense, You're proactive, you're not reactive. And from a risk perspective, this is where it really comes into play. So again, the financial outcome, you're scalable. Now you realize you can't be scalable, what you're good at, what you're not good at. You're shaving off things that you're not good at. That's all done. You've already done that by stage 4 here, and you're adaptable and you're focused on scaling with the customer and matching the customer's needs. Then we get to stage 5, where you reflect this, and these are the exemplars, right? Where you know that agility, innovation, advanced integration, everything that we read about in the trade journals that everybody should be doing, this is where everybody says, yeah, we should be innovative. And a lot of the articles that we read are focused on the exemplars. They're not focused on stage 1 and stage 2, folks. They're focused on the exemplars. So we have to watch what we read, and these things are generally much more difficult to implement. And there's some challenges in sustaining that innovation and agility while managing complexity and the barriers to automation and human oversight to adapt to market changes. So those are the things that you're trying to always keeping up with the latest, and you're focused on being adaptive and leading the market versus lagging the market. So these folks understand that whoever goes in first with a new product usually gets the majority of the market share. And so they're focused on that perspective. So they are focused on revenue, and they are focused on value outputs where the customer will see value. They'll make mistakes, but they'll recover very quickly because they're adaptable, but they're willing to take risks. The other thing that you might want to think about early on in the process, you're willing to take a ton of risks to build your company. In stage 2 and 3, you start becoming more and more risk averse. And then you realize in stage 4 and 5 that risk is your friend, and you use risk to differentiate yourself from the competition. So I wanted to throw that in as a wrap up. With that, we will ask you all to enter in the chat or in Poll EV, what stage do you think you're at? And with that, I'll stop talking a little bit and ask Greg to comment on some of the things that he's seen in his career. Greg?
Yeah, I like the idea, and this is why we're using the Gartner folks. I like the idea that Jim mentioned about risk is your friend. as you migrate, what we've seen by observation over 15 years is as you migrate from stage 1, 2, and 3, all those elements, the complexion, what you're trying to do, all good. We've seen it time and time again with our clients. But as you break out of stage 3 and go into 4 and 5, it's very interesting to see how the risk perspective, and the risk appetite changes, where most folks breaking out of stage 3 tend to look at risk as an opportunity. We all know high risk, high reward. When you are cooking with gas in 4 and 5 in those stages, you take a different perspective on risk. We've seen it because we've had all types of companies in different levels of maturity, in both supply chain maturity and risk maturity. So very interesting to see how the risk perspective changes as you move through the 5-stage Gartner model.
I think we're having some technical problems with Poll EV. I'm not sure why. I apologize, but please do enter any comments in the chat of what stage you think you're on. We'll continue on this journey in this next section.
Yep.
So thanks for your patience with that. Then I'll turn it back over to Greg.
Yep, you bet. Yeah, we're in our second section, folks. We want to share just a couple minutes on our perspective of the 3 dimensions of stable growth. So with that, we'll move on and talk a little bit about our three-dimensional cube. This is our three-dimensional perspective on the risk on the resilient enterprise. The first dimension is on the front left. That is supply chain process maturity. Why do we have it there? And we'll talk about each one of these uh, uh, dimensions in a minute. But why do we talk about supply chain maturity? Because the studies and our observations over 15 years have shown that improved supply chain process maturity equates to financial benefit to the bottom line over time. So we'll touch on one of the tools that we use to evaluate supply chain process maturity. The second dimension on the right side is supply chain risk and resiliency. Why? Because as we mentioned now, risk management is no longer a nice to have, folks. Based on our VUCA complex supply chains, it's a must. And so we'll touch on this concept in a minute as well. And then the third dimension is on the top. That's what we call a balanced scorecard. Some of you may be familiar with that framework. Why do we advocate balanced scorecard? Because we feel it's a pretty good business set of questions of discovery, because it takes an inside out and an outside in view of the company in terms of constant discovery. So this framework to us is extremely important when a company is in Gartner stage 3 and wants to move to the next stage, which is thinking about the company from an outside in perspective, as Jim mentioned. He described the Gartner 5-stage model. The business or the balanced scorecard will profile that in a minute for you as well. So we'll move on. We'll talk first about the supply chain process maturity assessment tool. This is a tool we've worked with for about 10 or 12 years. It was born in the first of a kind MBA supply chain risk management course at Lehigh University. I taught there for 10 years. It was so well received by the students, we took it on the road way back when. It's been operating for about 10 or 12 years. We utilize it in classrooms and workshops, webinars like this, and client engagements. We've now upgraded the tool within an LMS, a learning management system. It's a self-paced approach. You can get in and get out. What are you looking at on the left? It produces a Likert type chart. How do you read it? Well, it's got 13 tenets. If you look at it like a clock, the blue tenets on the top right are what we call strategic tenets. The red are what we call tactical tenets. And then on the left side of the clock, you have the green tenets, which we consider operational. All right. And so what does it measure? It measures two things. Measures your supply chain process maturity and your inherent risks within those processes. All right. So if you take a look at it, you see the black line. The black line is the as is outcome of a company's answers to the questions. All right. And so how do you read it? The closer that black line is to the center of the chart, the more mature that process is for you and the less inherent risk, and vice versa. Farther away you are from the center, the less mature that process is at the moment, and that provides you might have a higher level of inherent risk. The beauty of this tool, folks, is it's free for you. All right, we have the URL here. You can go to our website, but it's free. You can go in, play around with it, you utilize it with your team, your inherent team, take a look at it. It's what we consider a dialogue starter. What does my supply chain maturity look like today? We consider these 13 tenets a good picture after 45 years in this business, a good picture of an end-to-end supply chain capability. So with that, we'll move into supply chain risk and resiliency. This is our maturity model. I'll explain it real quick. On the left-hand side, on the y-axis, is supply chain risk and risk and resiliency maturity from low to high. On the x-axis is time. We call it competitive advantage, and we have five stages. Real quick. On the bottom left is foundational. That is what you're doing today. You're getting educated. You're becoming aware of all the best practices. The next stage we think is very important is visibility in your supply chain. Visibility upstream to your supply base and downstream to your customers. Don't forget about your customers. Gartner talks about it. Jim mentioned it. As you move from one stage to another, your customers have to be part of the ecosystem. Third, predictability. Not really what you might be thinking about. This is where we advocate you digitize your supply chain. Why? For the reason of doing what if scenarios. Once you digitize your supply chain, you can run risk-oriented what if scenarios. All right. And then build risk mitigation plans. Next is resiliency. This is where you start to embed best practices and all the tools and techniques into your daily supply chain operation lives. And then finally, sustainability. It is the box is green, but we're not advocating going green here. This is as you move up the maturity model, you might take a small product line, demonstrate all kinds of wins, and then how do you expand across the enterprise? That's what we mean by sustainability. Our mantra is up at the top. We think you have to identify, assess, mitigate, and manage risk all through the 5 Gartner stages. And here on the bottom, you can see we put a heat map together. As you first start out in your maturity, you have some high risks. As you move up the model, you can mitigate many of those risks. And then our last question is always, again, where might you be in this 5-stage maturity model as it relates to risk management? All right, we got one more. We said we'd talk about the third dimension, which is the balanced scorecard. It's pretty good. We think it's pretty good. Gives you 4 perspectives: financial, customer, internal, and growth and learning. Let's take a look on the left-hand side. The first 2, basically financial perspective, it asks the question, how do we look to our stakeholders and shareholders? The customer perspective says, what do our customers think about it, about us? How do they perceive us? What are their expectations? Then the 2 others on the other side of the balanced scorecard are basically the internal business perspective, and it asks the questions, what must we excel at to support our growth and the other perspectives? And then finally on the bottom, growth and learning perspective, that's internal. Can we continue to improve and create value within our organization? So it's outside in, inside out. Basically, it has a cascading approach with and I'll show it to you in a minute. The balanced scorecard framework gives us KPIs, risk areas, and levels of strategic, tactical, and operational tasks. So pretty good. We like the cascading effect because it starts at the top with a vision, mission, goals, and objectives, and then you can move all the way down to KPIs, including performance KPIs and risk KPIs. So with that, we wanted to share with you our perspective of the 3 dimensions, and we'll move into our next section. This section is aligning supply chain management assessment tiers. We have more than one tier in this tool to drive stable growth, and I'll turn it over to I think I'll turn it over to you, Jim. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot here. So with this, Greg covered the supply chain management tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the program. Again, tiers 1 is focused on that individual assessment, which could be taken at any time, no matter where you're at in your program, in the process of maturity. Tier 2 getting that cross-functional look at your organization. In other words, having your supply chain leaders across, that means sales, it means operations, supply chain transportation, it's all the key stakeholders in your supply chain take it and you roll it up into what we call the tier 2 report to say, what are all your stakeholders saying? And what are they saying the same? And what are they saying differently? And that helps identify where your organization is on this stage 1, 2, 3, 4 of Gartner. And we'll show you that alignment in a second. Tier 3 is has an industry benchmark component as well as a strat planning type component where we look at what you're good at and where your performance gaps are, where your pain is. And then in tier 4, what we get into is our SC&R program where we'll work with you to help you move along in the maturity if you're stuck. Many companies are often spend too many days, so to speak, or years in a stage 1 or 2. And the whole idea is, how do we get through what we call the stage 3 wall? It's very difficult to overcome. And we will work with you through that and how to use risks to understanding risks to help you navigate that wall. So between risk and customers, two most important concepts to help you scale that stage 3 wall. So with that, we'll go back to this question of where you are today. And if you have any questions, my experience has been that, coaching companies through this effort takes a lot of different alignment, but mainly it's the leadership. Something we haven't brought up, and I'll just bring up a couple minutes here, is to say, if the leader isn't bought in, the CEO, C-suite's not bought in that they want to change, maybe, it's going to be very difficult to mature. So, but this can be used as a guide and a driver to say, if we do change, this will be the benefit that they will receive. And the company will become scalable and they will satisfy the stockholders and the employees. Greg, any final words?
Yeah, thanks a lot. We had two observations or entries. One, Jim was one company is in stage 4 and another company said stage 3. So thanks a lot for trying to use the chat as opposed to poll EVP. Thanks for providing us your observation based on our definitions of the 5 stages. So thanks a lot for that.
Great. With that, I think we'll just move on. Again, anytime you have questions, please enter them into the chat. Again, we wanted to align the supply chain management readiness tool, which Greg went through, that Ring of Fire, Apprentice, Mainstream, Exemplar, with the Gartner Stage 5s. And we've aligned this, and in future webinars, we'll actually show you how we statistically align this. But for today, at a high level, this is the alignment. So when folks are in that 8 to 10 range, it aligns very well with what Gartner describes as stage 1 and so forth. And we've done quite a bit of analysis on this by industry. And that's one of the benefits of joining the program of the supply chain readiness, where you can actually see where you are, not only to the best in class rating, but how you fare relative to your industry. We've collected enough data that we can do industry benchmarks. And that's how the program is aligned. So again, that tier 2 that we talked about, that cross-functional assessment, you can do at any time. That strategy assessment, which is industry and the strat planning in tier 3, provides a lot of insights for you to help you move from especially 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. Moving from 1 to 2, there's some block and tackle things that we can help you with. Our tier 4 offering is road mapping, which we can help you through any of the stages from 1 to 2 and so forth. With that, we just wanted to provide some very high level best practices on how to get from stage 1 to stage 2, which is our focus today. And, you know, the top one, of course, is you're going to move to siloed organizations. And we understand there's a lack of collaboration between siloed organizations, but you still need to build those. And you're probably having a lot of collaboration challenges in that amoeba state of stage 1. And so moving from stage 1 to 2, you're going to build that, but you have to go in with your eyes wide open that it is building a siloed organization and not allow yourself to get too disparate. So that's a challenge in moving to stage 2. Limited data utilization. Very often, folks are not using data, they're using gut, they're trying to move fast. Everybody's working 20 hours a day, and 6, 7 days a week. And it's tough because you're not taking the data and you're not building the systems to collect the data, and you may have limited data just because you have limited transactions. So there are some things that we can help you with that as far as mapping and understanding your core processes and what you should be doing and not doing. Generally at this stage, most of what we find is folks are doing too many things. They have to limit what they're doing because everybody wants to do everything, but you have limited resources. Not that you ever don't have limited resources. There's obviously a resistance to change because we've got this far. We want to follow the same model. When looking at organizations, stage 1 to 2, you often see organizations, because you're moving from, let's say, 4 to 16 people to 25 to 40 people to 200 people to 800 people to 1,500 people. Every time you go through one of these changes of structure where you've grown on the number of folks in your organization, there's a lot of changes going on, and you need to be very aligned to how you can make that work. And so those transitions are extremely important to manage, and you can get stuck in that stage 1, 2, just as you're growing and you're building silos and you're going back to that amoeba state. So you're between stage 1 and stage 2. And then because of that, you're trying to create core processes, but you have inadequate technology integration. Why? Because you have disparate processes, which is creating disparate systems. Everybody has their own way of doing things, and you're running on Excel and PowerPoint and gut feel. But the data is not shared, and you have job roles, and people are not doing what they were hired to do, but they're doing what they need to do to get the job done. So you got a lot of confused folks in their roles and their role definitions, and everything's short-term focus, get her done, purely get her done, and not being able to look at long-term strategic initiatives because they're changing and because your organization is morphing quite rapidly. So it's hard to balance between short-term and long-term strategic initiatives. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg to give us some real-world case studies. Greg?
You bet. Thanks, Jim. We thought we'd share with you an assessment for a healthcare NGO company that has had experience with the SCM assessment readiness tool. So we'll just give you a little thumbnail sketch here. Over on the left, you can see the classic chart, and you can see their as is profile in the black line. A little different, pretty far away from the center. Up in the top middle, you can see their gauge. this organization came in as what we call an apprentice at 7.95 out of 10. That puts them in the apprentice category of best in class supply chain maturity. Then we went in and looked at their strategic, tactical, and operational tenets. And essentially their strongest set of tenets was strategic at 7.73. And remember, in this particular assessment tool, the lower the number, the stronger the supply chain tenet. So their strength was at strategic, and then it dropped down to operational, and then finally to tactical. We also then took their data and moved it into a benchmark area of the tool, and they more or less came up as a laggard. This is where we put them into the classic 4 quartile, 1, 2, 3, and 4, based on their supply chain process maturity within their own industry. As Jim mentioned, we have enough data points now in our database to be able to benchmark a company within its own industry and give them a sense of where they reside within their industry based on their process maturity. All right, so next picture image from the tool is we also ask additional questions. This is coming out of our tier 3 within the same tool. We ask questions about importance of those 13 tenets. How important, rank them, how important are these 13 tenets to you? We rank them. We also ask more questions of discovery about the same 13 tenets to more or less say how satisfied or dissatisfied are you in terms of the performance you're getting from those 13 tenets. And we take that information and we normally do a top 3, a top 4. You can see the top 4 tenets over on the left: supply purchasing, logistics integrated, supply chain, and supply chain processes. This helps us help them prioritize what to do first, second, or third to improve their supply chain process maturity and get the biggest bang for the buck. So that's another type of question of discovery survey we have. And then finally, the tool provides an action plan for this company based on the recap up on the top left. Who are you? Who are they? They're apprentices, so they're very immature in their processes. Their strength is strategic tenets. And where do they reside within the industry benchmark? They are laggard. So based on who they are, where they are, what they are, the tool gives them an action plan. And here were some. They said, you should probably focus on your tactical and operational issues for supply chain risk and resilience. Maybe will help you improve the weakest tenets and leverage the strongest tenets. Maybe begin a process of identifying internal and external risks in your supply chain. Maybe develop a risk register. That's where you can codify all the identified and assessed risks, and then maybe begin the process of developing risk mitigation processes when you identify and assess those risks. You can see the opinion or the testimonial from the global health director of this company. They were very pleased, and they're moving forward to improve their supply chain processes and risks. So with that, we'll move into our last section, and that is the profit pathway. We said we'd talk a little bit about that. We have a slide that we'd like to share with you, and that is what we have seen. This is what we have seen over our 15 years and more in the risk and resiliency space. Over in the top left, the benchmark KPIs. These benchmarks come from friends of the consortium. This one happens to be from Gartner and IBF, the Institute of Business Forecasting. 2 basic KPIs: top line revenue growth and customer delivery. What are we talking about? Over in the top right is moving from the Gartner stage 1 to stage 2, from more or less the ring of fire that you saw in the case study to the apprentice arena. What can you achieve? You can achieve top line revenue growth anywhere from 5 to 10%, and maybe customer delivery, the OTIF, another 10 to 15% improvement. The second KPI in the middle is EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That comes from our friends way back when, Chainalytics. It's cost to serve. That's the KPI that you want to look at. You can reduce the cost to serve anywhere from 5 to 10% as you move from one stage to another. Another KPI in the bottom, RONA, return on net assets, that comes from Gartner studies. Fewer stockouts than your peers, anywhere from 10 to 15% less stockouts, which improves your turns, which improves your RONA. And then finally, free cash. We're big advocates of cash conversion cycle. If you don't use that as a metric of supply chain performance and risk, you should. You can find it. It's free. It's out there for 45 years. We got some data from the Hackett Group. When you move from stage 1 to 2, improve your processes in supply chain, you can improve your cash conversion cycle anywhere from 5 to 10%. So these are all improvements to the bottom line when you move from a different stage in Gartner, when you start to improve your supply chain processes and start thinking about risk. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. It all comes down to money, right? So with that, just as a recap, some helpful hints from the supply chain management perspective, create that moving from stage 1 to 2, create that single language, that foundation. Utilize the assessment tool, get an as-is status from your supply chain maturity, and give us a call. We'll help you through that. From a supply chain risk and resiliency perspective, think about internal and external risks. What are they in your supply chain? Start to look at your end-to-end supply chain. Who are your suppliers? And identify those risks. Start exploring using a risk alert system. A risk alert system can be used at any time. But spending the money on a risk alert system, you have to have your core processes ready for what are you going to do with those risk alerts once they come in? Do you have core processes that will execute upon finding those risk alerts? That does take some time and effort. So it's always a good thing to look at, but do you have an appetite in your organization to do that at this stage? Should you be waiting until you're at stage 2 of Gartner? Of course, from a balanced scorecard, just to recap, of course, moving from stage 1 to stage 2, you're focused on revenue per unit, and now you're focused on cost per unit. It's all good. You're starting to get enough widgets and enough transactions to make sense. Generally in stage 1, or you're trying, it's hard to find people, and in stage 2, you have people, but you don't have standardized roles. People are doing everything they can to make it work. Internal processes, you're moving from ad hoc to streamline processes. That's the goal. And of course, the customer is minimized, and you really want to start figuring out how to manage your customers proactively. And then finally, from a Gartner alignment perspective, if you have a strong leader, so if you have a strong leader in your running your company with a vision, what we're saying here is the tier 3 tool, that industry benchmark, is probably optional because you already have a strong vision and you know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, the tier 3 can really help you a lot defining where you are in the industry and where you want to go. It's a very easy strat planning process that can be incorporated with all your other strat planning processes. It's very simple to do. It doesn't take a lot of effort for your leaders in your supply chain, and you get a lot of good feedback to help you align your vision and strategy to executable things that can really help you in your supply chain and help you move yourself forward. With that, we'll close out the webinar. on the deliverables. Again, hopefully you got what you were looking for in this webinar. You know, there's insights to build a resilient enterprise, overcoming some barriers to increased operational stability. Again, we focus on stage 1 and 2. If you have questions about moving from other stages, we'll be covering those in the subsequent webinars. And you can see that roadmap to stability that we're building with you. And there is a financial payoff to sell to your leadership of how you can increase maturity and in line increase profitability and to drive the metrics of your stakeholders, whether it's the board or whoever it is throughout that process. With that, I thank you very much. Thank you very much, all the folks in the chat for coming. And we look forward to your comments and questions offline or at our next webinar. Feel free to ask us at any time. With that, again, our next webinar will be coming up here on February 20th. And so we hope to see you then. And we'll focus on stage 2 to 3, and we'll throw in some other nuggets of information. Then we'll also we will also look forward to you joining in the rest of the webinars. And with that, Greg, any closing comments?
Just thanks a lot for hanging in there. Hopefully we provided you some helpful threads on our perspective of the resilient enterprise. Remember, it's a journey, not a point solution. And feel free to exercise our free SCM process maturity assessment tool to get started. Any questions or comments, you can always follow up with us. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you at the next Gartner Stage 2 discussion.
Yes, and I just want final thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully you can see how risk plays a major role in driving supply chain management maturity, and how customers are also part of that whole equation. So maybe the takeaway is customers and risk, how to make them work for you instead of against you to grow your enterprise. Thanks so much and have a great day.